Hi, this is Jennifer from Read It Again. Join me while I read the second half of the Cobble Street Cousins, Some Good News by Cynthia Rylant. Please consider subscribing, and if you enjoyed this book, hit the like button and share this video with all your friends.
Good job.
Part 2 of the Cobble Street Cousins, Some Good News by Cynthia Rylant, illustrated by Wendy Anderson Halperin. Chapter 3, News. The cousins worked on their newspaper all week after school, and by Saturday morning they were ready to make copies for the neighborhood. Aunt Lucy had loaned them the old Royal typewriter she had inherited from her aunt, Aunt Lindy, and Lily had taken on the job of typist. Good practice for poets, she reminded the cousins. Tess had done the artwork, Rosie did the lettering, and the courier was finally ready. The girls stood by Aunt Lucy's copy machine and watched the newspaper roll out. "It's beautiful," said Lily. "Rosie, your headlines look so great," said Tess. "And look at your great jokes," added Rosie. When the copying was all finished, the girls borrowed Aunt Lucy's stapler and Aunt Lucy's desk and put their very first newspaper together. Aunt Lucy stepped in and looked over their shoulders. "I love it," she said. "You cousins are amazing." "Of course," answered Tess with a grin. Rosie handed Aunt Lucy a newspaper. "You get the first one," she said. Here it is, the Cobble Street Courier. News. Mr. French, owner of French's Market, is now selling birdhouses. Birdhouses he makes himself. Inquire at the market. They're beautiful. Yay! The mail carrier, Miss Larson, has a new puppy named Kipking. She says he likes cottage cheese and grapes. Another grape, please. Please be careful of the little maple tree on the corner of Olive and Plum. It's new. Weather, sunny, we hope. Don't forget to take time for tea. Cobble Street by Lily. I love to live on Cobble Street. I love the houses so. The pink one Mrs. White lives in, the brown ones in a row. I love the friendly people, and I love the little trees. I love the cats in windows and the flowers full of bees. I love the smell of muffins Mr. French bakes every day. I love the little playground where the chubby babies play. The sun shines bright on Cobble Street. I know it always will. I love to live on Cobble Street. Each day is such a thrill. So please take care of Cobble Street and keep it clean and bright. And say a thanks for Cobble Street when you lie down at night. Lucy's flowers for your sweetheart. Page 2. An interview with Michael Livingston, who lives in Livingston Arms on Vine. What is your favorite book? The Borrowers by Mary Norton. Why? Because when I was a boy, it made me think small and look at small things. I began to notice the tiny things in my backyard, especially the different leaves on plants. Is that why you study botany now? Yes. What is your favorite plant? The Christmas cactus. Why? Because I think it's a good listener. Do you sing to your plants? Every day. What is their favorite song? Singin' in the Rain. Thank you, Michael, Rosie, and Elliot. Jokes by Tess. What comes from invisible cows? Evaporated milk. What instrument can a frog play? A harpsichord. What's gray and goes squeak, squeak, squeak? An elephant wearing new shoes. How does a conductor sneeze? Ah, choo-choo. Page 3. Rosie's recipe for yummy shortbread. If you're young like us, you should ask for assistance from an adult. 4 sticks of soft butter, 1 cup of sugar, 4 cups of flour plus a half a cup. Mix everything together until creamy. Then work in by hand the half cup of flour. Press into a round pan. Use the bottom of your hand to press. Prick nicely with a fork and sprinkle with sugar. Bake at 300 degrees for 1 hour. Cut while warm and serve with cinnamon tea. Yum! French's Market for your apple a day. Here's an idea. Take a clean rag and dip it in blue paint. Blot it all over your white bedroom wall and it will look heavenly. Tess interviews Elliot, her cat. Elliot, how do you like living on Cobble Street? Perfect. What is your favorite color? Purple. What do you want to be in your next life? A person. How long do you plan to live with Tess? Permanently. That's funny. Page 4, the Cobble Street poll. Question, what is your favorite pet? The results are 11 people like dogs, 9 cats, 1 a cactus. What is your favorite dessert? Results, 9 liked chocolate cake, 8 for ice cream, 3 for shortbread, and 1 a mouse. Who could that be? Where would you most like to live? Results, Cobble Street, all 20 people. Oh, except for 1 Broadway. Now let's deliver, said Lily, and the cousins did just that. Chapter 4, Yardley. Everyone loves it, Tess said excitedly as the 3 cousins ran up to the attic with the last copy of the Courier they had left. All the rest they'd given out at Aunt Lucy's shop and at French's Market. I can't believe Mr. French gave us a free birdhouse, said Lily, lifting it out of the paper bag she was carrying. It was shaped like a star and painted in yellow and blue stripes. Aunt Lucy will love it, said Lily. We should hang it on the front porch for her. Tess picked up Elliot and plopped down on a pillow in the playground. I never knew publishing was so fun, she said. I could have told a million more jokes. I think Michael liked the interview, said Rosie. He said that no one had ever asked him about singing to his plants before. You know what we forgot to do? Asked Lily. We forgot to take a copy to Mrs. White. Oh, my goodness, said Rosie. We have to give her this last copy, said Tess. She'll love being in Lily's poem. We should run right over. Maybe Michael will come with us, said Rosie. He likes Mrs. White. Rosie, you always want Michael to come with us, said Lily. But he has to study. He's getting a PhD. A pretty hard degree, said Tess. Well, let's just call him and see, said Rosie. We could have such a nice tea all together with Mrs. White. So the cousins phoned Michael. I'd love to come with you, he said, but I have to bring Yardley. Who's Yardley? Asked Rosie. My father's basset hound, answered Michael. I'm babysitting. Perfect, cried the cousins, and they combed their hair and hurried over to Vine Street. Michael was waiting for them in front of his apartment building with a sweet, fat, adorable basset hound at his feet. Oh, cried all 3 cousins, dropping to their knees to pet and kiss the friendly dog. Yardley loves attention, said Michael. It's his favorite thing next to pizza. He eats pizza? Said Tess. My father can't help himself, said Michael. He gives Yardley pizza, corn chips, Swiss cheese. It shows, smiled Rosie, patting Yardley's tummy as he rolled over for her. But Yardley is beautiful anyway. He even sleeps with my father, said Michael, sometimes with his head on the pillow. Lily smiled at Michael. Your dad sounds great, she said. You should bring him to see us at Aunt Lucy's. Michael reached over to straighten Yardley's collar. "I will," he said. "Maybe when your parents come back from their tour. We could have a sort of a reunion or a wedding," said Tess. Lily gasped and covered Tess's mouth with her hand. Rosie giggled, and Michael blushed, a deep scarlet around his collar. "Well," he smiled, yikes." Everyone looked at each other, then burst into laughter. "We'd better get going," said Lily, "before Tess finishes any more sentences." So the cousins and Michael strolled over to Mrs. White's little pink house, retelling Tess's funny vaudeville jokes and reciting lines from Lily's poem. And Yardley lumbered happily along beside them. Chapter 5, A Small World. Mrs. White was delighted to see everyone because she was 90 years old. She didn't get out to do much visiting herself. So she was always happy for company, especially when the company was cousins. "Girls," said Mrs. White at the door of her small pink house. "And Michael! How nice to see all of you. And who is this?" she smiled, looking at Yardley. Yardley wagged his tail and licked her hand. "This is my father's dog, Yardley," said Michael. "He'll wait for us in the backyard. I hope you don't mind my bringing him." "Of course not," said Mrs. White. "He's a sweetheart." "We brought you a copy of our first newspaper, Mrs. White," said Lily. "It's called the Cobble Street Courier," Tess said. "I interviewed Michael," Rosie added with a grin, poking Michael's arm. "Oh, wonderful, wonderful," said Mrs. White. "How lovely. Do come in and visit." Michael let Yardley into Mrs. White's backyard, then everyone stepped inside her parlor. Tess held up a small bag. "We stopped at French's Market and got some fresh olive bread, Mrs. White, and some cream cheese. And sparkling apple cider in a fancy bottle," said Lily. "We thought we'd toast our success with you." "Wonderful," said Mrs. White. "Let me get some dishes." "Oh, no," said Michael. "We don't want to make a mess in your kitchen." Rosie was smart enough to remember paper plates and cups. "With kittens on them," Rosie said with a grin. Mrs. White loved cats. She even made tiny cat dolls. "Well then, let me add some nice strawberries to the party," said Mrs. White. "My neighbor, Mr. Harrison, just dropped by with some." "Should we invite him?" asked Michael. "Well," said Mrs. White, "I'm sure he'd like that. He's a widower with no family and doesn't see many people." "Are you sure you won't mind?" "Of course not," said the three cousins. "I'll phone him," Mrs. White said, smiling. Before long, the cousins, Michael, Mrs. White, and Mr. Harrison, were all seated at Mrs. White's small dining room table in front of the picture window. Mr. Harrison was a little shy. Lily could see, so she made a special effort to be nice to him. "Do you have a garden, Mr. Harrison?" she asked. He smiled. "Indeed I do. Every summer I have so many tomatoes, I have to give them away to everyone on the street." "I love fresh tomatoes," said Michael. "Michael is studying to be a botanist," Lily told Mr. Harrison. "How nice," said the elderly man. "What a wonderful way to spend one's life, studying plants." Michael smiled. He liked Mr. Harrison already. "I want to spend my life singing," said Tess. "I want to spend mine writing," said Lily. Everyone looked at Rosie. "I want cats," said Rosie. They all laughed. "That sounds best of all, Rosie," said Mr. Harrison. Rosie grinned proudly. "What sort of work have you done in your life, Mr. Harrison?" asked Michael. "Oh, I've done several things," answered Mr. Harrison. "I was a teacher, then a lawyer. Finally, a senator," finished Mrs. White with a proud smile on her face. "Oh, my goodness," said Rosie. "He was a state senator for 25 years, said Mrs. White, "and a good one." "Then you must have known my grandfather," said Michael. Yes? Asked Mr. Harrison. His name was Charles Livingston. He was a federal judge, said Mr. Harrison. I certainly did know him. A fine man, very intelligent. It's a small world, said Mrs. White. Gosh, we already have a great story for our next paper, said Tess. Could I interview you sometime, Senator Harrison? I'd be honored, he said, smiling. Suddenly, everyone heard a scratching at the back door, then a whine, then a bark like a bass drum. Michael smiled. Yardley knows we have cream cheese, he said, and he wonders why he isn't getting his share. Rosie giggled. He ain't nothing but a hound dog, she said. Well, Mrs. White smiled, let's let the poor dear in. I don't mind, truly. I like dogs. Are you sure? Asked Michael. I'm sure, said Mrs. White. So Yardley joined everyone at the table, wagging his tail, sniffing shoes, putting a paw on Michael's knee. Maybe we'll interview Yardley for our next issue, said Lily, letting the dog lick some cream cheese from her fingers. I know what Yardley will want to be in his next life, said Tess. What? Asked Michael. A chef. Everyone laughed and laughed. It had been a wonderful week for the 3 young cousins on Cobble Street, and there would be more wonderful weeks to come.